We are so excited for you to be joining us today as we tackle the parable of the prodigal son. If you have spent any time in church, I am quite certain that you have some history with this passage. Jason and I have probably recorded episodes on this passage at least once, if not twice.
Right.
It's one of the most moving stories ever told in all of human history. And so I'm excited to see what God has for us today in it. Not necessarily new or groundbreaking, but just God's going to have something for us new today. And so with that in mind, Jason, I want to ask you, how do we want to approach this text today? How do we want to give dignity to the story that Jesus is telling, the characters in the prodigal son story and who they represent, and the very nature that he is telling a story with characters that represent people he is talking to some degree, and how that can all impact both how we read it and how it would have been heard by the people he's speaking to.
Yeah, well, that's a tall order.
Just do it all in like a quick 20 seconds.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
First of all, he's still responding to verse 2, where the Pharisees accuse him of, welcoming sinners, or make the point he welcomes sinners and eats with them, which is a huge violation. And so he's still talking about the heart of God, the kingdom of God, what it's like to live with God. And that's really important that we put in that context. In terms of the people, number one, remembering it matters when he includes any detail. And so it's really important to pay attention to the people. It's not incidental. How the people act is not incidental. I would remind you he's making the story up, which I don't know why that's useful to me, but reminding myself these aren't real people. They're types of responses. And this isn't a one-time situation. This is a description of God's perpetual heart. But yeah, in the Jewish mindset, honor was a huge, huge deal that largely gets lost on American audiences today, or maybe even contemporary audiences in general. And there's a ton of Jewish conventions that this story is going to break. And it's like a lot of certainly Jesus' best stories. And what I probably mean by that is you have more data, is that it cuts in every direction. Like if you really have eyes to see and ears to hear, this will cut you too. And hopefully, like you were saying, it will inspire you. It will draw you in. It will give you more space to be with God. And so that's my quick answer.
My name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
So we'll begin reading in Luke 15, verse 11. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his field to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, All these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him." "My son," the father said, "you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So, Connor, in that long reading, and one of the things I love about texts we've done before or we've read a lot is the promise. I used to just skim this, that was my whole thing. If I'd see this in a book, I wouldn't even read that part. I'd be like, yeah, prodigal, prodigal son story. But it's that belief that if we're willing to look and be curious, we'll learn something new. And so, not to set you up,
Sure.
but what amazes you about this story?
I mean, there's so much. Even in that reading, like you said, I've read the story so many times. And as you're reading, as I was listening, and my eyes were going down the text with you, every single verse, there's just a new thing popping to your mind of the implications about the character of God, the implications about me, the implications of how God feels towards me. It is truly just staggering. And so, again, to honor our process, I'm going to try to do my best to stick to one. I think the thing that's really hitting me today, the Father is not defined by his children's lostness. It's just incredible to me. There's part of me that doesn't get it. There's part of me that the Father clearly has overwhelming love for his children. He absorbs the worst thing that could be said about him by his youngest son, that he is his younger son would rather him be dead than be alive and be with him. And then his older son, he says, you've never even given me a goat, which is basically saying the goat is the most chintzy, small thing that the other son could possibly imagine, the gift of the Father. And so he views the Father in just this horrific light of being small and miserly, and to be so at odds with your kids. I've always focused on the nature of the identity of the kids in the Father, and I still am amazed by that. I'm not saying, but I'm saying, and right now it's just hitting me, as a father of two for the first time, hitting me what it means that my heavenly Father, his deep love for me, his deep love for you, listener, his deep love for you, Jason, and our waywardness, our selfishness, our sin, does not cause his identity to shift or change, or move. It's beautiful to me today.
That's the part of the discovery of God's word and our approach. There is this dynamic among us that when we want to know something, it's like we think about it like we're investigating. We find all the data, we bring it all together, we correlate it, okay, what's saying the same thing, eliminate redundancies, and then we're like, okay, here it is. In the process that we're kind of strangling it to death, it's this interesting dynamic that we get really fascinated with it, and if we can get to the bottom of it, then a month later we're not interested in it. And the Word of God is not like that. Like, you could analyze it, but you're lying to yourself if you're like, I figured it out. You just are. It's got endless depth. And I love that about that consideration. And part of it is, it's like when you study the parable of the soils, like, which soil are you right now, kind of thing. And that's reasonable, but it's one part of the story. It's not the whole story. And I think in this story, I think that is really, really beautiful. And for me, the amazing part that jumped out to me was this. I heard somebody say years ago that it's a misnamed story. Prodigal, which is a word we don't use, means excessive. And so it's really the story of the prodigal father, not the story of the prodigal son. Because ultimately, this dynamic of him giving, it's just so dumb what he does. It's just irresponsible. Like, typically, if you heard a guy had a son, and we don't know how old this son is, he's younger, but he could be 40, he could be 50. We have no idea. We assume he's 20-something, But it is that idea, he comes up, this is what you'd say is like, obviously, because no matter his age, this kind of request comes from immaturity. You don't coddle immaturity. I can remember students in the past, and we were in this context, we're all living in the same place, and they would always come to me. Every year we'd have a new crop of students, and every year one or two would come and be like, my roommates are so immature. And what they were saying was, move me. That's what, in regards to their words, they were saying, I need you to move me to in with more mature people. And I'd listen, and I would empathize with them, and I would try to problem solve if I could. But one of the things I just was so true, I'm like, I don't know if you know this, but one of the marks of maturity is loving the immature. and they didn't enjoy that piece of the discussion typically, but it is really true. And part of it, when you're the mature person, you don't allow fleeting requests or a whim to be honored. You just, it's unreasonable. I perceive it as unloving. So if I heard his story of a guy think about how nothing this is. He's like, they moved in together and he has power of moving them, and he just randomly moves this person. And I'm like, no, you would want to leave them there unless they were like physically in danger, because now they're only learning to do the wrong thing and it'll be rewarded. Think about this. You're in wherever, you're in Sprouts, and your child wants candy. I put you in Sprouts because every illustration is Walmart. You're in Trader Joe's for the healthy among you, and your kid wants candy. You don't want to give your kid candy if your kid is demanding candy, or else they'll just demand and cry and do that. Mm-hmm. This is really reprehensible. Like, it's such irresponsible parenting. Mm-hmm. And then I love the thought of the son leaving and doing bad things and being welcomed back. I love that thought. Mm-hmm. I love that thought. I want to be that to my children, to the people in my life. I want to be that. But that thought of everyone that's hearing this story is like, that's not God. It can't be God. Mm-hmm. Because that is not, it's unwise what he's doing. He's honoring the whims. Maybe this kid had thought about it forever and ever, but it does seem the way he should have had a plan, at least invest some of it. This is just the worst of it, and that's the part that amazes me is, it could perplex me easily, but it's like his generosity of spirit, not even fully listening to the story, immediately moving. And I've heard enough commentary on this to know that the son could be in some danger because the community would stone him. And so that further, complements that idea of here's why he's running to him to protect him, which adds even another layer of beauty if that's true. And I could see that being true. But at the end of the day, it's just like, how do you stay so generous? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of this story, what I'm my thing was the climatic point would be when the older son comes in and they all hug and happily ever after. But where are they 6 months from now with this kind of reinforcement? Mm-hmm. And then obviously you turn the corner and like, oh, I'm that guy.
Yeah. Well, you think about, so the story of Israel is this story played on repeat over and over and over again. This is the Old Testament over and over and over again. The people of God who God has promised himself to, them agreeing and saying, yes, like, you are God and we will be your people and we will follow you all the days of our life. And then 2 seconds later, they're like, okay, now, anyways,
anyone got a God?
Anyone got some gold we can melt down real quick? It just happens over and over and over again. And the beautiful part, the astounding part is like, it'd be easy to read the repetition of the Old Testament and then read the repetition even into this of how Jesus is perceiving all that's happening in history as in regards to God and his people, and assume God just glazes over. It's like, okay, he's the permissive father who just, You walk in the door. Okay, here's $100. Go fix it, or I'll call somebody tomorrow to fix the car that you totaled, or whatever it is. Like, you could almost get that perception of irresponsibility. And yet, when you go read the Old Testament, you read the prophets, and when the prophets talk about how God feels about His people when they've run away, like, God still feels all the emotions of if your kid were to abandon you and say, "Hey, I basically tell you, I wish you were dead. Now I'm going to go and do my own thing and follow my own path." God feels those feelings, and He understands the repercussions of when that happens. Death follows for all that are around, and yet that does not snatch the joy of God that He has for the reconciliation and for the turning back. And again, this is just one of those things where if Jesus isn't God, it's a good idea, but it's not. It's a good idea that's going to get you hurt, I think. Right. I think if you take this as ultimate truth, and Jesus isn't the Son of God, and He didn't die and wasn't, raised again, then I think if you try to live out a lot of the principles and view the world in this light, I think you will get hurt a lot. Yeah. And I think it will lead probably to not your benefit in the end. And yet, if this is if this is ultimate truth, if Jesus is who He says He is, and the truths that Jesus is trying to get across in this parable are actually embedded in the reality, not just of our physical universe, but in the God who made it, then the efficiency, the lack of efficiency, the haphazardness, the recklessness that we would see from our 21st century eyes, and even that they would see from their first century eyes, we can then begin to put it in its place, right? If we make the decision that we believe that Jesus is who He says He is, then we can begin to realize, oh, there's something about the way that I view love. There's something a way that I view how God is a parent and how He sees His children that is off.
Yeah. I was thinking we were talking two things. One is on that last part you're saying it would be unsustainable. You know, clearly when He's asking for it, they literally have to sell off property. And so if this happens when He's 20 and then 30 and then 40, you soon get to a place there's no property anymore, which that's the physical story. And of course that draws our attention to, does God have unlimited resources? And the answer is yes. But I think this helps me, the grittiness of this dynamic of Him having to call His friends and say, I'm selling the North 40. I don't know what that means exactly, but you get it, these acres over here. And the painfulness of the memories of, that had a nice stream, or I loved feeding the sheep off that, or whatever they did with the land. Sure. And that's the part that it's unsustainable.
Yeah, and I think there's so much power to realize that the older son, he thought the father was powerful. He thought the father was important, but he thought the father was limited. He thought the father was finite. And I think that's so much of the great sins of the Pharisees. Yes, is they've insisted we found the box for God, and here's the box that He wants, and we have it for Him. And that, I think, is so much of the great failure, and the imploring of Jesus at the end of it. In my mind, it's a direct imploring the Pharisees who He is speaking to. He kind of like we talked about early on. He kind of pulls them down with the analogy of, like, say you're a dirty shepherd, or say
you're a woman.
Oh gosh, can you imagine? Yeah. And now He's saying, hey, imagine you are compare yourself to a brother that has been the worst son in the history of the world, right? And you're just as bad as him. He's imploring them, like, in a way that is just like you almost like, I would just love to see how Jesus told this parable. Like, as He gets to the end of it, is there just this deep yearning to get like, hey, like, you've always had it. Everything has always been yours. All you've had to do is not go soak off in the corner of the party. Like, this has always been yours. And I think a lot of times my frustration with God can come down to my maybe misunderstanding or my inability to process His infinite resources and His infinite wisdom, and my inability to process those things at times, whether consciously or subconsciously, leads me to to believe that he actually his resources are finite, or his wisdom for me is finite. And I think that is the great trap that I fall into often.
I totally agree. And I really appreciated your initial comments just about that cycle that Israel went through over and over again, and God expressing through the prophets, whether it be they major or minor, that dynamic of he feels it every time, which only amplifies the nature of his generosity.
Yeah, you could get the picture of a father that is just, I think I saw movies all the time of like, you're in Hollywood and you got the rich producer father, and just, doesn't matter. And the very fact that he'll pay for his kids' mistakes, pay to paper over all the mistakes, means he actually doesn't care.
Right.
Because the money is nothing. The money is not important to him, or the money is like so little in the grand scheme of things. And I think it is so hard as in our human minds to process that God can feel the full depth of the weight of our sin, and also feel the full joy of love for his sons and daughters.
Absolutely. And that internalizing, I think, is so important initially, and then the externalizing of it to everyone else, including all the people that I hope I never have to talk to again in my life, and that's just true. And it's not because I think they're bad. It's just, I'm like, man, I don't have impact there. I don't have power there. And then, his generosity covers all of it. And that is just life-giving. So what perplexes you about this story?
Yeah, I think this is the perplexing thing about the very ministry of Jesus. There's a sense, no matter how many times I can be shown this is not the truth, that proximity equals knowledge, or proximity equals understanding or intimacy, or some sort of unspoken to depth. Hannah and I will, and this is not like, this feels kind of like too much hubris to say. There are times where Hannah and I will have conversations where, like, we Hannah and I talk all the time. My wife and I, you're a new listener. My wife and I talk all the time. That's a noteworthy thing to say. But honestly, sometimes when we talk to other couples, it will come out that like somebody's got a big problem with the other person, and you're like, oh, okay, what does the other person think of that? And I'm like, I haven't told him. Like, what do you mean you haven't told him? You live in the same house. How have you not processed through? How have you not talked about this? And that has happened many times in our conversation. So it's hard for me because, like, Hannah and I, we just talk about literally everything. That's part of the way our life is set up and just the way we are. And so, so much of my life feels like this just feels impossible. Like this, it just feels impossible that the other son, or the other lost son, can be so close, can almost taste it, can almost be a part of the party, can basically, the image that I've always gotten from this is like the son is like, the party's going on, everyone's there, and he's off in the basement just sulking, and it's like, how can you come that close? How can you dig that deep? How can you be in that space and still not get it? And the perplexing thing about that is, like, that is one of the areas where I feel like I empathize the most, where there are times where, like, I'm like, man, God, I feel like I'm doing the things. Like, I feel like I'm exercising the right disciplines. I feel like I'm really attempting to have fidelity to your word. And yet I'm like, I feel like there's a party happening that I can kind of hear. It's muffled. And many times in my life, God has, I feel like, spoken to me with what he says at the end, and invited me in, and I realized what the hang up was. And yet, this dynamic just keeps popping up in my life, and I see it in other people's lives, of proximity does not necessarily mean intimacy. And that is just a truth that my brain does not want to learn.
I always, when I think about biblical stories and there's some failing in it, some character or actual person, like the men in the boat and the storm and Jesus' sleep, like, how would they have handled that in a way that really honored Jesus, really said they trusted Jesus? We've talked about that in other episodes. And I'm wondering, and of course this is a made-up story that Jesus is making up, but But it's like, what would been the right way for the son to do it? Obviously, in this case, he just joined the party, but those are real feelings. I don't think God is glossing over his anger. And I think the father's response to him, well, the fact even includes his words, honors his anger. This guy's angry. Even if we say that's a bad choice, he's still angry. And the father doesn't say, don't be angry. He says, here's perspective that I want you to have. And he's asking him to celebrate and be glad. So there's that part. But it's like he's not denying, he's not saying, well, you don't know he's with prostitutes. Like the only one that says he's with prostitutes is this older son. So who knows if he was or not? If he goes off into far off land and they don't have a telephone, does he really know? But, who's to say? But it does strike me, if I wanted to tell him my brother, I'd always add or exaggerate a little bit. If he hit me once, I'm like, Jeremy was hitting me all the time, It's like, okay. But anyway, it's like, what would the good picture? Is this simply a matter of him? And then I'm like, how is this me? Is this simply a matter of him? He could have been like, hey, I have some friends. Can we get a goat? And the father would have been like, a goat? Let's get a calf for you. Let's get it going. What was in his brain that caused him day after day after day not to, and here's the thing, ask for what he needs? Yeah. And I was raised and told, don't ask for what you need because that's petty or it's not significant. God doesn't care.
Well, the thing about what they've asked for, what the Pharisees have asked for, is that God would rescue the people with a Messiah. And in their mind, they think that means, okay, either there's some small... there's now a new Israel instituted, and I assume in their minds they're like, and we're also very important counselors to this new Messiah figure. Mm-hmm. Throws off the yoke of Rome, a new kingdom is established, and there's a whole bunch of things that flow from that. And like, you get the sense of like, God, we asked you, we asked you to send the Messiah, and Jesus is looking at them like, you asked for a goat. What you wanted from a Messiah was a goat, and like there's a fat, and I'm telling you, like I am the fattened calf, and the party is so much more grand than you ever possibly imagined, and I think like there's part of this that there's so much about this story that just always moves me. Just shout out, by the way, if you've never read it, pick up The Prodigal Son by Henry Nouwen, one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. I tried to convince Hannah to name our son or give him the middle name Nouwen, but she wouldn't do it. It is what it is. Anyways, all that to say, the heart that Jesus has to the Pharisees here, after all that he's already been through and what I believe he knows is coming, to then implore them like, listen, I have better for you. Like I have more for you. Like you have access to that. Like, and in the story, the father calls him his son. He even recognizes there's special connection. There's a distinction between the wandering son that's the sinner and has gone off, and the son that is stuck out. There's distinction. There's like God's a recognition for a difference between the way that the Pharisees have acted versus a tax collector or a sinner. And he's saying like, my son, don't you get it? Don't you get it? There's this imploring from Jesus that is so beautiful from the heart of God. And it's the opposite side of what you were talking about. Like it's the flip side of almost the irresponsibility that Jesus has, or that the father has for the younger son to sell off his land and go off. It's this, it'd be like in this scenario with the older son, it'd be easy for the father figure to go like, oh, if you want to get out of here, just go, man. Whatever you want to go, I'll give you a goat. And that's not the response. And so the father's response is nuanced, and it's personalized, and it's individualized. And Jesus, I believe, like I would love to know, is Jesus looking a Pharisee in the eye when he says this? Is he boldly declaring it, or is he making like deep eye contact with these enemies of his, and imploring them to see that like, hey, there is more than a goat for you, my friend?
I think about that dynamic of them standing there, and his disciples are there. It's my understanding, and those Pharisees, how many of them we don't know, but eye contact, that's a fascinating dynamic to me, because you've been at tables where somebody's not making eye contact with a certain part of the room, or they're only making eye contact with one person, and it changes the feel of what's happening in the room. And in general, his nonverbals, if nonverbal communication is 70% of it, there's a lot we're having to imagine here, and so I think that's fascinating. I just want to point out real quick what perplexes me, and this is one of those things. I know I've read these words, but it never hit me till right now. At the tail end of verse 12, he's asked for the estate, and so it says, then the narrator, so he divided his property between them, between the two sons, and that's another interesting thing. I don't think, because he'd be dead usually, so it's not like a third. Mm-hmm. The father gets a third, the older son gets a third, he gets half. So that's that's even more offensive. But then the next 4 words, not long after that, in my mind, he gets the stuff and he leaves immediately. Because how could you possibly stay when you've watched your dad sell off half his property? That almost is more offensive. And I mean, long after, I don't think it's hours of the way it's said. I think it's days, but it could be months that he's still living with the goodness of his father, and he's just possessing I assume, liquidated, money. I'm just like, that is such a weirdo scene to me.
That is bizarre. I never picked up on that. That is, again, that is so funny. You think you can read something so many times, and yet maybe somebody has said that before in the past, and I'm just not hearing it. But yeah, that is incredibly interesting. And I want, why did Jesus pick those words? Because like you said, he picked these words carefully, and again, we don't want to expand them out and build systems around just this, but there had to be a reason why he specifically added. He could have said, if he wanted to, immediately at that time, he went off. So there has to be a reason that he does that.
Yeah, and even the process alone, and I've thought about this a bit in the past, but it's just really hitting me today. But the process, I always thought growing up, it's well, let me get my checkbook, you know what I mean? Or let me, it's like one of those casino shows where he's got a briefcase and he's got all these stacks of $100 bills or whatever, and he's like, all right, so he's got a calculator there going. This was a sale, so you had to find a buyer, and I'm not saying it took months, but even hours would be so uncomfortable. Yeah. It feels like I've always had this. It's always funny. I grew up watching the soap operas of my mother or my grandmother, depending on where I was, and invariably in every soap opera, not every episode necessarily, but every different brand of soap opera, there'd be some amazing, groundbreaking accusation, and you are the father, and they just stand there and then it fade to black. And it's I wish they would actually play it out till that person leaves the room, because that would be the most uncomfortable after the accusation is out, or somebody's finally said, here's the elephant in the room. How do you get out of the room after that? Because if you ever confronted somebody, you're like, here's what I want to say to them. You are the worst person ever. It's you are the worst person ever. See you next Tuesday. What do you do after that?
So this might be a little too personal. I'll listen to this after the fact. I might take it out. One of the weirdest months of my entire life was when my parents told us that they were going to separate. And if listeners don't know, my dad, when I was 16 or 17, around that time, told us that always felt like my dad always felt like he was a woman and was going to go live that lifestyle. And that obviously my mom and my dad were going to try to work through that. Awkward way of phrasing all that. It is what it is. I think we've talked about it at a certain point. But one of the weirdest things was again, they've been married for 35 years, something like that. My dad's lease didn't start until a month after they told us. And so my dad we all just lived together in our small apartment at the time. And obviously, by the way, there was not nearly the amount of things around transgenderism and all that sort of stuff. That was just the very beginning of picking up then, and so there was not near as much of the cultural knowledge or
the political dynamics.
That hadn't even been established yet. That was not even a thought. And I can't even imagine if you go tell yourself, if I went and told myself then, hey, in 8 years this is going to be the defining, political one of the political policies or even just angles in our politics. That version of me probably would have been mortified to find that out. But anyways, very confused. Obviously, what it means for your dad to be that, and as a son, how do you see yourself? And there's so much that happened, and yet I just can't get over the weirdness that it was for this new dynamic to be at play, for my parents' marriage all but basically being ended of 35 years, but also the next day it's okay, I guess we're going to count. The clock is on. We're going to do this for 29 more days or however long it was. Weirdest time I've ever had by far. And yet, like, yeah, like that just happened. There was in my mind, if I was to tell the story, if I was to really write it out and tell the story of like my parents' separation, how it impacted me, I think I would probably skip that part. And yet, like if I talk to my siblings, we're like, yeah, that was odd. That was really weird. It's so easy to gloss over.
I think absolutely that's a great example. I was thinking of, I have several people in my world that have gone through divorce, and because of living situations, they've stayed longer. For my parents, my dad had like a medical episode, never returned to the house to live, came by when we weren't there, got his stuff, kind of thing. And so, and it's a weird thing to say. I think that was a gift, to us, especially comparison to other people's situations, but that, yeah, I'm back with that. Was the son there when the father sold the land? Did he still have his own room in the house? Did he still, hey, did you get my cereal? I'm just like all of that, all the basic rhythms of life. So uncomfortable. And so I don't know. I just think it's fascinating.
I even wonder if the reason Jesus puts it there is you're meant to expound upon that. And like the idea that like when the son asked for it, like, did he think like, oh, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to set up shop and I'm going to have my wealth, and then he actually begins to live with it, and that's what causes him to go off. And is it a natural consequence of being that way that causes him to need to run, or was it his plan from the beginning? I do think there is a sense in which like the people of Israel, the people that have fallen away, like I don't think a tax collector or a sinner is like, like, so let's say you're like a prostitute, a Jewish prostitute, and you you believe in the God of the Old Testament and you've been told about him your entire life. You go to, maybe your parents you're going to synagogue or whatever. I don't think some 15-year-old girl wakes up and he goes, you know what? Like, I'm going to run away, or like, I'm going to like really, I'm going to make like this decision I'm going to make is going to lead me into direct contradiction with the God that I've worshiped my entire life. And this is the truth of all. When we choose to sin against God, very rarely am I like, you know what, I'm gonna thumb my nose up at God, and I'm gonna choose to actively sin. We tell ourselves these comfortable lies, and no, I can sin and stay in the Father's house. Like and again, don't hear me, listener, and say like, oh, you have to be perfect to stay in the Father's house. But there is a willful choosing of your own way, willfully choosing sin over and over and over again, that will just naturally lead you away from being in the Father's presence. And I think this is a lie that like when the devil will tempt us so often, we're like, yeah, God's grace abounds. Sin a little bit more. Grace. It would be grace. It would be great. I don't think anybody starts off sinning or mocking God or rejecting God. At least initially, I think we all think we can make this work. I can get my own way and get what I want, but also still get the benefits of being a son or daughter.
Yeah, I think that is. That to me, and then I have the question, where's the older son when this is happening? He's like, you got this stuff because functionally speaking, all that's left is the older son's inheritance. And maybe I don't have a complete grasp on all of Jewish law, in these dynamics, but it is that, yeah, I just think it. And then I'm like, okay, how do I live through awkward? How do I live through if something's going on in my home, in my church, in my country, in the world, I think there is this part of me that's like, well, once this ends, then I'll really focus on God and focus on this. And the Spirit of the Father, if he's generous on the Monday that he says you can have this, then he's going to be generous on the Friday when he's got it in his hands, in a bag, whatever, how he's transporting his wealth, and it's like that is mind-blowing. And it goes back to, it combines the amazed and perplexed for me this time of, I'm creating those spots with Jesus all the time by the way I think and process information, the way I treat people, the way I say things. And yet his generosity is right there. And that to me is glad we did this today.
Absolutely. And listener, I would say if we didn't touch on your particular favorite thing about the prodigal son, I just want to own, like there's so much. You could do a whole podcast series just on this. You could do a whole, maybe even podcast, like you could create a podcast just around this and dive off of it into 1,000 different directions. But I'll just simply say this, and then we'll go out. Some days I need to recognize that the Father is running out to me, and some days I need to recognize that I'm being a wussy little child, pouting, and there's a party to be held. And so the Father both runs to me, and he also puts his arm around my shoulders and tells me that he's always with me, and that everything I have is mine. Everything he has is mine. And if there's one truth that has been a motto for me in my life, it is simply that verse of trying to rest and believe in that. And so I encourage you to do the same. Grace, peace, and love.